DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to episode 19 of the DevelopSec podcast. I'm your host, James Jardine, and today I want to talk a little bit about what steps we can take to help better our understanding of some of the vulnerabilities out there, whether you're a developer looking to understand more about cross-site scripting or SQL injection or authentication, authorization flaws, whether you're QA looking to do the same thing. Maybe we've heard of some of these different flaws that exist out there and we're curious to know how they work. And we want a little practice with them. Maybe you're just a home hobbyist that, you're curious about security and you'd like to understand more about it. Maybe you're thinking about a career change and you're thinking about, hey, how do I go about getting into the security field? And I want to learn more about these vulnerabilities. Well, one of the nice things that we have, of course, we have training and we have all kinds of stuff that's available. Webcasts. I mean, everybody's doing webcasts these days, podcasts, me included, right? This is actually one of 3 podcasts that I do. But we have all kinds of resources available to us, but a lot of these resources don't actually give us the hands-on experience to try out some of these flaws that exist, to see how we're going to defeat them, how we're going to use our tools. Maybe you've got something like OWASP's Zap proxy. Maybe you're using Burp Suite, and you want some way to be able to practice using it, find out really how the tools work, understand vulnerabilities a little bit better. So obviously we don't want to just go out to some website and do this, right? There's legal concerns, and while the legal field is up in arms right now trying to figure out what is computer fraud and abuse and what isn't, there's lots of talk about that. Your best bet is to kind of stay away from other people's sites unless you have permission. And when I say permission, I usually mean written permission. We want to stay away from messing with somebody's sites. I remember working with a developer years ago, and I was introducing him to application security, and we were talking SQL injection, and he was so pumped about it. He came back a couple days later and like, hey, do you have any place to practice this? Because, I was testing this on my buddy's site, and I really couldn't find it. And, we had a long discussion at that moment about how, look, you can't just go out and test this on people's sites, whether you know the person or not, right? It comes down to permission, because what you're doing, especially when it comes to security vulnerabilities, could be construed as illegal. And it's really up to the prosecutor to determine whether they're going to charge you with it or not. And then it's your fight to try to get out of it. So we don't want to get in that situation if possible. So what we can do is actually use what we call these target web applications, these purposely vulnerable web applications that exist out there that have all these different flaws, right? OWASP top 10 flaws embedded in them on purpose. So that way you can go through, try out your tools, execute cross-site scripting, execute SQL injection, play around with these different things and get a better understanding. Because while as a developer, I'm not necessarily going to be testing my stuff using SQL map, and I'm not going to be, executing SQL injection and this and that, I need to be more focused on how do I prevent this. Having that understanding of how to test for it makes it easier to help prevent, right? Because now when you go to actually test your application and you're doing simple unit tests, some of the character strings that we can throw in there that'll cause SQL injection to possibly pop. Doing that and knowing that, we can actually start writing some simple unit tests against our code. Or when we're just firing it up, hey, I just did a new feature, let me test it out real quick before it goes to QA. I'm actually throwing those tests in because I understand what I'm doing. I know, coming from a development background, a lot of developers, a lot of QA people, I think just people in general, right? We stick to what we're comfortable with. And then all the other stuff, we kind of, let me avoid that. I'm not really sure. But as we become more comfortable with testing for these type of flaws, you'll be more apt to do it in your everyday development and testing routines because you're comfortable with loading up your proxy, intercepting the traffic, throwing some random stuff in there to see what happens. because you understand a little bit better what it's doing. You'll know what will work, what won't work. And while you may not catch it all, at least you're starting to catch some of it, right? And then maybe you've got analyzers downstream that are looking at the data more in depth that can test it as well. But if developers start testing it, QA people start testing it, then we have our static analysis, our dynamic analysis, we have our third-party pen testing. We have all this stuff, this layers of defense to try to find all the different flaws that we possibly can. Hopefully, by the time it gets to anything third-party, there's very little for them to find, or what they are finding are extremely rare case or difficult flaws to find, and that's what they're there for, right? They're the ones spending all their time focusing on those hard to find flaws, not something simple like sticking a single quote into a input box and getting a SQL error and saying, hey, you have SQL injection, right? We should have caught that ahead of time. So using these apps, and there's a bunch of them available, and I'll give you a couple examples. We've got Matilda, which is kind of cool. Lots of features in there. And the nice thing about a lot of these is they provide you hints. They provide you solutions in most cases. Depending on which one you get, depends on how good the hints are, how good solutions are. Maybe solutions aren't available and you have to write out to them. It really just depends. But Matilda is one that we use often to show people, have people test with, train during classes. Same thing, DVWA, which is Damn Vulnerable Web Application, and I'll put links to all these in the show notes, is another one that's available that you can download, install. And another nice thing about these is that a lot of them come on these setup live CDs. OWASP has a live CD that's got WebGoat, which is another one of them, already installed. Samurai, which we just released Samurai 3.0 over the weekend, over the holiday. That one has things like Matilda and Damn Vulnerable Web Application and a couple other vulnerable apps already pre-installed on it. So you don't even have to do any installation. Download one of these live CDs, throw it up into a VM, and then just attack it against the VM or just attack it within the VM. And there's lots of benefits to that, right? If it's in a VM, I can segregate that on my network, and now that vulnerable application is no longer a threat to the rest of my network, because in many situations, for example, on Samurai, they're all bound to local hosts. So I can't get to Matilda from outside of that VM. I'd have to actually go in and reconfigure the VM to allow that. But Samurai also has Burp installed. It has a whole bunch of other tools. I think Zap's installed on there, where you can fire those tools up, try them out, learn what you're doing. A couple other ones that exist out there. There's BWAP from Bbox. Kind of cool. There's a lot of different scenarios in there for vulnerabilities that you can walk through. And then there's also just recently NT Objectives released out their Hackathon vulnerable app, which also looks kind of interesting. I haven't had a chance to check it out yet. I have used all of the other ones, at least to some capacity, that I've listed so far, but this one I haven't looked at yet. Most of these, when we're talking about them, they are web specific, but some of them also have mobile. Hackathon has a vulnerable Android app, I believe. There are a couple other ones out there that have vulnerable mobile applications where you can download the application and play with that if you're interested in mobile security. In addition, some of them, like Hackathon, are supporting some of the newer features that exist out there. So like REST support, Ajax, GWT support. Those are all listed within the NT Objectives Hackathon, as well as AMF support coming soon. A couple other ones have web services, some SOAP-based, some REST-based. So we really cover the gamut with a bunch of these targets. So if you're looking for something to start out with, these are easy to get because we do make them so accessible. And a lot of these, the developers of them are updating them a lot. I think I just saw, actually, WebGoat, there's another version of that getting ready to come out at some point. DVWA, Matilda, I know those, they're getting updates. So go out and take a look at them. Now, I encourage you that if you're going to go out and look at these type of target applications, one, be glad that there's nothing illegal about hacking these, right? Because they're on your local machine, right? They're on this VM. So you have the right to do this. But also, don't cheat yourself, right? Really give it a try. Don't turn on the easy hints, or don't, just enable it to have it give you all the answers. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that at times, hacking can be hard. Now, we see a lot of times that, I just threw a single quote in there. Oh, man, I found SQL injection. That was easy. This is so easy. And, a lot of security people will try to play it off as that, oh, man, it's so easy. I got the easiest job in the world. I only have to be right once, and it's easy to be right once. Right? There's all this about it. But when it comes down to it, especially a site where people like developers and QA and everybody's involved in security, and you guys are actually doing security right, hacking can be hard. Contrary to what we see in the news about everybody getting popped and, all the breaches at the point of sale systems and everything that's going on, sometimes it's difficult, right? And that's one of the joys of hacking, really. I mean, it's this idea that, hey, I'm going to look at something and try to figure out a way to get around whatever control you have in place. I want to be able to figure out how to make the app do something that it wasn't intended to do. Whether that's, just for malicious reasons, whether it's because I want to hack something to make something easier for myself, right? Maybe you're just trying to automate something within an application and, figuring out how it works and how you can kind of take shortcuts makes it easier for you to be able to automate something and improve your business process, right? There's lots of reasons, and they're not always malicious, as to why we're going through and figuring this stuff out. Unfortunately, a lot of what we do is because we see people doing stuff malicious. So we have to figure that stuff out kind of first. But we have to figure it out. And so there's going to be times where it's going to be difficult. You're going to bang your head against the wall. You might get stuck for a day, 2 days, a week trying to figure out one thing. But what I encourage you to do is go out, do research, right? You come across something. Hey, I'm doing HTML injection. Let me go look up HTML injection. Let me find out all I can about HTML injection, because this shouldn't just be an exercise where you're able to walk around and solve every problem in no time. Right? The idea behind this is you're starting to understand how these things work, how these flaws work. So now I want to actually go take a look at how can I go implement this in a pseudo real world? Because again, these applications were obviously built to be vulnerable, right? They're vulnerable on purpose. I'm pretty sure I'm going to find SQL injection on the page that's named SQLinjection.php. There's not a lot of hidden stuff there, but at the same time, you've learned what SQL injection is. Now you actually have to put it into practice. And it may not be just a single quote, right? Maybe we're doing blind SQL injection. Maybe it requires something a little bit more specific than a single quote to actually pull it off. Yeah, I can identify it, but how can I exploit it? And so take this as a learning experience to find out more about that flaw. Don't try to rip through a target in a day. Go through them, really understand how that flaw works. And when you get done working that flaw on one vulnerable system, go do that same flaw on a different vulnerable system, because nobody's coding them the same way, so things are going to work differently. So now you still have to think out of the box a little bit and continue learning and getting better at what you're doing, and you'll start to feel more comfortable with it, and you'll start to understand more of how you can deal with it in your own code as a developer, as a tester, right? It's just as important for QA folks to be doing the same thing. Right, QA should be comfortable going in and finding these type of flaws to the point where you understand what you're putting in. You understand what results you see depending on the input you put in for certain flaws, that when you're testing your own applications, you don't just look at the application with a blank stare of, what do I do here? What do I do there? Oftentimes in class, people ask me, how do you know to test for cross-site scripting there? Or, how do you know what to put in these different fields? And really the only response I have for them is it comes down to experience. One, coming from, a decade of development experience helps because I understand the back end. I understand what developers are doing. But two, testing a lot of sites, doing a lot of this different testing, you start to grasp where certain things most likely will pop up. For example, the search box of any website. The first thing I think of when I see a search box is cross-site scripting, because it's very common that they're going to reflect the search value back out onto the screen. So just from the number of tests I've done, and it's not every site that's vulnerable, but that's the first thing I think of. And the same goes for other areas, right? Based on experience, you start understanding how that system works, right? I'm not trying OS command injection in this field, but there's a mail field where I can send a message to somebody else. Well, maybe that has OS injection because maybe they're using the built-in mail command straight off the command line. Maybe I can do something there, right? So there's lots of understanding that happens there. And from a dev experience, from a QA experience, that actually is helpful to you because you may have more information, right? Developers know they're using the mail command, so they know they should be checking this, right? QA may or may not know that you're using the mail command, but as time goes on, QA should understand how that application works, so they know, hey, there's a good chance maybe OS command injection here, right? The benefit a developer and a QA user has is that you know the technologies, you know how the system is built, you know how the system works. It may be easier to rule out certain types of flaws in certain areas just solely based on how that system talks, right? As an outsider, I don't know how you're sending that mail. Inside you do, right? So you can cut out a whole swath of vulnerabilities depending on how you're sending that mail. But an outsider, I have to try to figure that out. So use these systems. They're very helpful. But again, don't cheat yourself, right? Go in, take your time, use them, write out to forums. Lots of people talk about these different things. If you look up for solutions do exist. But again, if you're going straight for the solution, you're not going to get the benefit of what these apps actually provide to you. And that should be your first step, right? Hey, maybe I've learned a little bit about this stuff. Let me start going in and working some of these environments. Let me start understanding, and I'm going to go through different types of vulnerabilities, really understand how they work. And then maybe, then I have to figure, I'm really looking for another type of environment to test in. And at that point, right, you have to understand, where do you plan on going with your career? What is your goal? Because when we understand our goals, then we can start to understand how we want to do things. But for those out there that are interested, I encourage you, and again, I'll post the links to some of these projects out there. Check out some of these target applications that exist because they provide a great source for going in and trying this. Now, if you happen to be near a con or something like that, you could always take part in a CTF for a little quick capture the flag action. If you can stand the techno music that they usually play in there for all day long. But that may not be what you're looking for, right? But something like this, I don't have to wait for a schedule. I can fire this up on a virtual machine. I can run it at home. I can run it, wherever. If you're allowed to run it at work, you can run it at work, but I'd check first. Some offices get a little weary about putting stuff like that on there because they're hack tools. I know, don't say it too loud. They're all written in, the development languages that you use. So I guess the development language may actually be the hack tool there. But check them out, right? Practice, learn how to understand how these flaws work. Because the better we have an understanding of them, the less foreign they will sound, and the more comfortable we'll be talking about them and taking care of these flaws. So that way, from a defensive side, right, we can start to look like we're actually on the winning side, right? Everybody always, offense always wins, defense, right? But any other sport out there, they'll tell you defense wins the game, even though you do need points to win a game, which is weird, right? But, defense makes a big difference, and we need to make sure that defense is on par with what we're doing. So the more education we can get, the easier we can make it available, the better off we're going to be. So check those out. I'll post them on the show notes. If you have any ideas for stuff that you'd like talked about or anything like that, feel free to shoot them over to me. The easiest way to get to me is james@jardinesoftware.com. And just send it on out. You can also follow me at DevelopSec or at Jardine Software, both on Twitter. Willing to communicate, chat with anybody that wants to talk about increasing their security knowledge. And I appreciate everybody's time. I hope everybody had a great holiday weekend. If you celebrate any of the holidays that happened over this weekend. And if not, then I hope you just had a great weekend. And we'll look for you on the next episode. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.